Hello and welcome back, lovers of stories well told. This session, we are continuing to honor the great author Robert C. O'Brien and this classic story he wrote, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH. And we are picking up on this chapter, getting towards the end now, at the meeting. Let's jump in. Mrs. Frisbee slept well and soundly. The day just finished having been the longest and hardest she had ever known. She awoke in the morning with a smile. Her house was warm, and it was safe at last. If you recall, the last chapter was all about the challenge of moving her cinder block house from one side of the stone to the other so it wouldn't get crushed by the Fitzgibbons' plow for the season. Her children slept peacefully beside her. Timothy's breathing was quiet and easy. They could stay in the house now as long as they needed to. On some warm day later in the spring, when Timothy was strong again, they would move to the summer house down by the brook. Another nice thing, she thought, when they left the house, she would be close up the entrance tunnel so that none could find it. Undisturbed by the plow, it would be ready and waiting for them in the fall. It could be theirs forever, thanks to the rats. The rats! In her half-dreaming state, she had forgotten. They were in terrible danger. What would they do? She felt as if she ought to go and offer to help them. But help how? She could think of nothing she could do. At that moment, she heard a voice calling her name from above. Mrs. Frisbee! I don't know who it is. I just had to go with a neutral voice there. I don't read on. I don't read ahead, rather, right? I'm experiencing the story right along with you. One take. That's my style if you don't know already. Let's keep going. She left the bed and went to the bottom of the entrance hole. Yes? Who's calling? It's me, Brutus. Could have gone with that. Can you come up? Mrs. Frisbee climbed up and out her front door, blinking in the early morning sunlight. Nicodemus wants to know if you can come with me. He's having a meeting. Just let me wake the children and tell them. 2 minutes later, she was walking with Brutus towards the rose bush. What does Nicodemus want? It's about the men. Justin told us last night. Nicodemus thinks they may be from NIMH. He wants to ask you more about what Mr. Fitzgibbon said. That morning, there were 2 rats on sentry duty, one just inside the entrance to the rosebush, watching Mr. Fitzgibbon's house, another at the arch where Brutus had stood. This is the guard rat that she had met when she first went to the rosebush. All of the rest were gathered in the large assembly room Mrs. Frisbee had seen when she got off the elevator. Nicodemus, Justin, Arthur, and 2 other rats sat on the raised platform at the end. Here we have a picture of that meeting. That's rendered by the author. I'm not sure who illustrated it. I have to think it's the author. Comment if you folks know. 2 other rats sat on the raised platform at the end. Read that. The rest sat facing them, filling every square inch of floor space except for an aisle up the center. Mrs. Frisbee had never seen so many rats. Even the young ones were present. She spotted Isabella, staring up at the platform with wide, round eyes. Some of the mothers held babies at their sides. Most of them looked anxious. There was an air of tension, but none of panic. Brutus led her up the center aisle to the raised platform. There was a table on it, covered with papers, and one vacant space where a chair had been placed for Mrs. Frisbee. The rats waited in complete silence while she sat down. Ooh, that's got to be a little chilling for Mrs. Frisbee, who I'm sure is not used to this sort of public attention, much less from a crowd of supernatural rats. Then Nicodemus said quite formally, Justin has told us all that happened. Mrs. Frisbee, it seems you have more than repaid us for your help we gave you in moving your house. Just as your husband did once, you have saved us from a disaster. Death or capture, we do not know which. We do not yet know which. Justin gave her a wink. Mrs. Frisbee had a taste of capture herself last night. Would you tell us, as well as you can remember it, word for word, what Mr. Fitzgibbon said about the rats, about the men who were at the store? As well as I can remember it. Mrs. Frisbee's voice sounded small in the big room. Mr. Fitzgibbon said a strange thing had happened in the hardware store. Henderson's, he called it. Her memory was good. She had listened with great care to what Mr. Fitzgibbon had said, and she was able to recall the whole conversation, word for word. The rats sat quietly while she told it. Then Nicodemus went back over it, asking questions. "You say that Mr. Fitzgibbon said 6 or 7 rats. Did he ever say which number it really was?"
"No, I don't think he paid much attention to the number."
"Jenner's group was 7, said Justin, but it could be a coincidence."
"Did he say how far away the town was where this happened? Or did he name it?"
"No, but it must not be very far. He'd been there and back that day."
"Did anyone see his car go out?"
Nicodemus asked the others.
"I heard it," Brutus said. "I was on duty. It went after lunch." "And he was back by dinner. By which direction?" "If we knew, we might send someone. You see," Nicodemus explained to Mrs. Frisbee, "we need to know who these men are. If they're from NIMH, things are much worse for us."
"We'd never make it," said Arthur. "Driving at 40 or 50 miles an hour, Mr. Fitzgibbon might have gone 15 or 20 miles in any direction and returned easily the same afternoon. On the map, there was a road map on the table. On the map, there was a road map on the table. You can see it could have been any one of half a dozen small towns, and each of them might have had a hardware store."
"You're right, of course," said Nicodemus. "Without the name, that idea is hopeless." He turned back to Mrs. Frisbee. "Mr. Fitzgibbon said the rats were grouped around the motor, as if they were trying to move it."
"That's what he said the store owner told him. He didn't see it himself."
"And that the motor was plugged in."
"He had been left plugged in," Mrs. Frisbee quoted.
"But we don't know who plugged it in."
"I got the impression," Mrs. Frisbee said, "from the way he said it, that the store owner had left it plugged in, but I'm not sure."
"That would make sense," Arthur said, "if it was Jenner, and if they had plugged it in themselves, they'd have known better than to try to move it, so they must not have realized. It was probably pretty dark in the store."
"Poor Jenner," said Nicodemus. "I wish he had stayed with us."
"It will be poor us," said one of the rats at the table. Mrs. Frisbee did not know his name, "if we don't get on with this."
"He did not mention the doctor's name," Nicodemus said. "Did he say even a word about what he looked like?"
"No."
"Did he describe the truck at all?"
"No, only that it was full of equipment."
"Are you sure about the headline on the local paper? Mechanized Rats Invade Hardware Store?"
"I'm sure that's what Mr. Fitzgibbon said it was, but I don't think he saw it. He didn't say so."
"In a way, that's the most puzzling thing about the whole story," Nicodemus said.
"Why is that?" asked Justin.
"Because the headline doesn't really fit the facts. You don't call a bunch of dead rats mechanized just because you find them on a shelf near a motor."
"Maybe not," said the nameless rat. "But then why did the newspaper say that?"
"I'm wondering," Nicodemus said, "if perhaps there wasn't more to the story. Some stronger reason to think they were really taking the motor away. Or that they knew how to use it."
"Maybe some other motors had been stolen," Justin said, "or some tools. That would make them seem mechanized."
"It would," said Nicodemus, "and it would explain what the doctor meant when he said they had more checking to do in town."
"They're looking for things that they're missing." "Right, they're looking for the things that were missing," Arthur said, sounding suddenly worried. "They're looking for Jenner's headquarters, and if they find it—"
"We're just guessing, of course," Nicodemus said, "but it's a possibility."
"And a bad one."
"Means," Nicodemus continued, "that we have no choice. We've got to assume they're from NIMH. We've also got to assume that by now they may have found Jenner's headquarters, whatever cave or cavern they were using."
"And," said Justin, "that now they're looking for us." "Why for us?" asked one of the rats. "Why wouldn't they think Jenner's group are the only ones?"
"They might," Nicodemus admitted, "but I don't think so. After all, they knew there were 20 of us originally. Why should there be only 7 now? And we already know they're coming out here in quite a hurry at it. So if they're from NIMH, obviously they are looking for us."
"I think," said Arthur,
that we've got to make some plans, and quickly.
I agree, said Nicodemus.
It's a new situation, and a tricky one. We wouldn't be able to do everything we hoped for. There isn't time. And somehow we have to convince the exterminators, when they come, that we aren't more of the mechanized rats they are looking for. We won't be able to move any more food to Thorn Valley, Nicodemus continued. We'll have to get along on what we've already got stored there, about an 18-month supply, if we're careful. The seeds, I believe, are already moved.
Yes, said Arthur. The last load went yesterday.
So with luck, we'll have our own first crops this summer and fall. We won't have time to destroy the motors, or the books, or the furniture as we planned. Instead, we'll move everything to the cave, and then we'll seal off all entrances to the cave as if it had never existed.
That can be done, Arthur said.
But there's more. We've got to pull all the wires and lights from the tunnel. They're likely to dig it up, and the carpet. We've got to tear down the arch. Then, when all that's done, when everything is hidden in the cave, we'll fill the stairway and the elevator shaft. We'll seal off everything except the upper storage room and the tunnels leading to the front and out the back. When they dig, let them find that room. It's as big as an ordinary rat hole. Justin, tonight, take a group of a dozen or so. Go to the Fitzgibbons garbage can. Bring back a load of the worst-smelling garbage you can find. The storage room is going to have to become an ordinary, typical rat hole. Not in the least mechanized or civilized.
Nicodemus turned to Arthur.
What do you think?
I think we can do it all. We won't get much sleep, though, Justin said. But there's one more thing. Won't they think it's odd, possibly, if they're from NIMH, especially if they're from NIMH, finding just an empty hole?
Nicodemus said, I was coming to that.
He sounded suddenly very tired.
Tomorrow morning, as soon as it's light, the main group leaves for Thorn Valley. But some of us will have to stay behind. As Justin says, if they find just an empty rat hole, they're sure to be suspicious, and they'll keep on digging. So when they come with their gas truck, they've got to find some rats here. A rear guard. I'd say at least 10.
Mrs. Frisbee walked slowly home, so scene change. Keeping to the edge of the woods, keeping out of sight. Justin had instantly volunteered for the rear guard. Brutus was second, and behind him 8 more. There were 50 more waiting behind them.
Enough, enough,
said Nicodemus. Isabella in tears had run forward.
I want to stay, please,
she had pleaded, looking despairingly at Justin.
No children,
said Nicodemus, and her mother led her away, still weeping. Those 10, the 10 who would remain, did not face certain death, nor certain capture. The exterminators, they presumed, would make noise, especially if they cleared away the rose bush. The rats would be alerted. When the men pumped gas, as expected, into the hole, the pump would also make a noise. The air below would move as the gas flowed in. When they felt that, the rats would scramble out the back exit, past the sealed-off cage, emerge as noisily as possible in the blackberry bramble, indeed, show themselves, and dash off into the woods. But won't they block the rear exit? Or put a net over it?
We'll give them another rear exit.
We'll give them another rear exit to block, Arthur had said cryptically. One that's easier to find. Next scene, same chapter.
Mother, why are you so quiet?
Asked Teresa. They were sitting down to dinner for the first time in their newly moved house.
You seem sad.
I suppose I am,
said Mrs. Frisbee said,
because the rats are all going away. But that's no reason. It's true they moved our house, and that was nice of them. But we didn't really know them.
I was getting to know them pretty well.
Where are they going?
Cynthia asked.
To a new home, a long way away.
When?
Tomorrow morning.
Will you go to see them off?
I think I will.
But why are they moving away?
Asked Timmy.
Because they want to,
said Mrs. Frisbee. Some day soon she would tell them the whole story, but not that night. And that concludes our chapter. Wow, so I don't know about you, if you saw the movie originally that was made back in the 80s, it seems like a slightly different sort of twist on the story here and stuff like that. I wonder if and where Jenner's going to appear. So stick with me as we all discover the dramatic conclusion, the final chapter here of Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH. I believe this is the final chapter or close to it. The Doctor. All right. Let me know your thoughts, any feedback. Thanks for sticking with me, and we'll see you on the next one.